Hi. Today on Better Minneapolis, we're bringing you a conversation with Congresswoman Angie Craig as she launches her run for the U.S. Senate. We talked about the experiences that shaped her, growing up in a mobile home park without reliable health care, and how that fuels her push to lower costs, improve community safety, and reform Washington. We cover healthcare affordability, the $35 insulin cap, housing shortages, childcare costs, and what it will take for families to get ahead in every corner of Minnesota. She also opens up about surviving an attack in D.C. and discusses her work on mental health, addiction, fentanyl, and holding big tech accountable. And we dig into immigration and how she balances fighting harmful policies with finding bipartisan solutions. If you value clear, grounded conversations about Minneapolis and the future of our state, become a subscriber. Your support makes this work possible. Let's get into it.
Hi, welcome to the latest edition of the Better Minneapolis podcast. I'm here with Angie Craig. Thank you for joining us, Congresswoman.
It's great to be with you.
So you're running for Senate. It's a big change from your current position as a representative for Congressional District 2. And obviously, a lot of people in Minneapolis want to meet you and hear about you. So maybe you could just start by telling us what motivated you to run for Senate and what the theme of your campaign is.
Well, thanks so much. It's great to be with you. And of course, great to be running. And I'd be honored to represent not just the second district, but the city of Minneapolis as well. A lot of your viewers probably just know me from the attack ads that Republicans have run against me for the last 10 years of my life. And I grew up in a mobile home park. I was raised by a single mom and my grandmother. My own family was on supplemental nutrition assistance support. At times growing up, my own family lacked access to health insurance at times. So when you ask me why am I running for the U.S. Senate, it really comes back to why I ran for the House too, in the first place, because for a while now, I have recognized that those opportunities that used to exist for young people in our country have been disappearing. And, I ran for Congress the first time in a Republican district that had been in Republican hands for 3/4 of a century. And what motivates me to run for the U.S. Senate really is that we've done some good work, but there's a whole lot more work left to do to make sure that everyone has access to health care in this country, to make sure that everyone has access to opportunities in this country. And I just love serving the people of Minnesota.
So your current district is kind of a mix. It's south of Minneapolis. It's kind of a mix of suburban and more rural areas. And you've obviously expanded your lead in the last four sessions, I think, by 14 points in the last election. So how is the message that you're able to promote there? How is it going to translate, you think, into more of the urban areas like Minneapolis and Rochester and stuff?
Well, the main messages I've been running on in the second, I think, translate well to Minneapolis and across the state of Minnesota. Number one, how do you lower costs for people? Democrats are now talking about addressing the affordability crisis in our country. That's what I've been working on over here in the second district. A lot of Democrats and now some Republicans take credit for the bill that capped insulin at $35 a month, but I actually wrote that bill as the Congresswoman from the second district. The other big theme that I run on in the second is keeping our community safe. And that means supporting local policing and local police doing good work for our communities, fair, just work. But it also means keeping our communities safe from gun violence in Minnesota. And that's why I've been, even in my first term, the co-sponsor of a bill that would ban military-style assault weapons in our nation. And then the third theme and the second that I've run on has really been about Washington's not working. It's not working for a lot of people. My first bill was to ban members of Congress from being able to trade stock, also to ban them from ever becoming lobbyists. So a lot of my run for Congress has been about what needs to change in Congress to make it work for Minnesota, campaign finance reform, those sorts of things. So, the main themes of how do we make life more affordable and give folks opportunity? How do we keep our community safe? And how do we fix Washington? Those are the themes I've always run on in the second. And those themes have allowed me to win by 14 percentage points, as you said, in a district that only leans Democratic by about 3 percentage points. And I think it will and is translating really well statewide.
Yeah, it's impressive what you've accomplished there. You've been sort of on a listening tour around Minnesota. I've seen you in a lot of different places, Grand Rapids, um, all kinds of different places. What sort of things are you hearing? I think, you wanted to do some town halls when Republicans weren't showing up. What's the reaction that you've gotten? What are the themes, the types of questions you're hearing?
Well, the themes and the questions, the priorities that I'm hearing, number one is the affordability crisis. It might be a little bit different in, on the Iron Range that it is in the city of Minneapolis. Maybe it's rent
Mhm.
in the city of Minneapolis, but it's childcare on the Iron Range. It's access to, health care in greater Minnesota, right? In Michelle Fishbach's district. And you mentioned it, it really pissed off my Republican colleagues, which is, frankly, a byproduct that I'm extremely proud of. That I went out and did town halls in each of their congressional districts because they wouldn't. In fact, they were so mad at me, they filed an ethics complaint against me, literally for doing my job, or for doing their job for them, as well as exactly what I do in my own congressional district. So, I think the reception as I've gone statewide, and I think we can take some lessons from this last election there, right? Zohran Mamdani ran on the affordability crisis. And
Mhm.
maybe the solutions in New York City are different than Abigail Spanberger, who's going to be the next governor of Virginia, but she also ran on the affordability crisis in our country. So that's what I've always run on, whether it's lowering cost by taking on big companies that are corporate price gouging, whether it's putting more money in people's pockets by eliminating federal income tax on Social Security income, by making really rich people pay more and
Mhm.
longer for it. The policy solutions may be a little different if you look at a state like Minnesota versus a city like New York City. But I think we're on to something. And if Democrats really stay focused on the affordability crisis, how are we going to make healthcare more affordable, more accessible to people? Then I think it is going to be a very good 2026 election for us.
Well, a big one there that you mentioned is healthcare, and it does. I think a lot of people are looking at their bills, their premiums going up for next year, and wondering what Congress is going to do about it. And recently, we had kind of a big event here where UCare is going under, and like 300,000 Medicaid lives are going to Medica. And then there's a lot of talk about cuts to Medicaid. So there's a lot of people, I think, feeling very insecure and worried about what's going to happen with their health care next year. What role do you see yourself playing in helping to keep Medicaid financially solvent and making sure that we have an infrastructure to manage healthcare in the state?
Well, make no mistake about it. We have the ability to make sure all of those things are solvent, but my Republican colleagues just gave away $3.5 trillion to the richest among us by the tax breaks in the reconciliation bill. So the money's there. They've just chosen to give it to large corporations and very rich people already in our country, which is truly stunning. Look, I mean, none of this is surprising. The Trump administration in the big ugly bill cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid. The Trump administration refuses to extend the ACA tax credits, which is driving up healthcare costs. And the marketplace is already adjusting to what the Trump administration is doing. And, it's all one chain, right? What happens is if you cut $1 trillion for Medicaid, uncompensated care is going to go up at our nation's hospitals. What are hospitals doing? They're shifting cost already to private payers, private plans. And what are the employers doing? They're shifting those costs to employees. So I've been saying this from the beginning. It's cutting $1 trillion from anything is going to, in healthcare, is going to cost to go up everywhere. What do I think Democrats need to be doing about it? Well, you mentioned, health insurance networks a moment ago. Look, I think it's time for a public option in our country. Why are we relying on health insurance companies at all to administer benefits in our nation? Why don't we allow people to buy into Medicare in our country? Why aren't we pushing those big, bold reforms that we could actually accomplish in this country in a fairly short time period, short order, and give people more choices? The ACA obviously had a lot of incredible improvements, like being able to carry your child on your plan until age 26. You hope by then, I've got 4 sons, you hope by then they're all on their feet. But it is becoming harder and harder for young people to be able to get on their feet. And so, I think we've got to be bold. One thing I'm known for is pissing off Big Pharma. While a member of Congress, it was, again, my bill that capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for America's seniors, my bill that would expand that to everyone in this country. I held out on the Inflation Reduction Act, even under Biden, to vote for it until the administration made a commitment that Medicare could start negotiating its drug pricing. Big Pharma spent $6 million against me in the 22 election as a result of the things that I've done as a member of Congress. And look, those are the kinds of things you should expect from me as a U.S. Senator. I'm ready to take on Big Pharma. I'm ready to take on the people in Washington who think Washington is working just fine. I don't think that at all, and we need to make sure we keep fighting to fix it.
So, you mentioned the cap on insulin. I think that's been really popular. That was quite the win. Are there other drugs that you would like to see capped as well, or do you have a list at all? Or
Well, look, I think Medicare should negotiate all drug pricing, but you know what I really think would help fix what's happening in prescription drug costs in this country? And that is, there's no reason why an American pharmaceutical company should get a patent of 12 years to develop a drug. Their payback period is much, much shorter than that. And there's absolutely no reason why we should allow those big pharma companies to pay off generic manufacturers to keep them out of the market so that they don't have competition. One of my hangups in USMCA, which was, of course, the Canadian-Mexico trade agreement we made, is that pharma had wormed its way into the process under the first Trump administration, and they wanted to extend the patent life in Canada and Mexico from around 7 years to 12 years. Well, I revolted and said, I won't vote for USMCA unless you take out the sweetener that the administration was trying to give to big pharma. So look, if you want drug costs to come down, you got to make it really, really a lot simpler to get drugs to market for generic manufacturers so that these big pharmaceutical companies have more competition. That is one of the big keys, I think. And you got to stop the law that allows those big pharma companies to pay off the generic manufacturers not to come to market. It's a huge problem. If you really want to fix it, it's worth fighting.
Absolutely. And you mentioned childcare in there. I mean, can be done about childcare. I think Minnesota has some of the highest costs in the nation for childcare. Is there room for more programs there, or?
Yeah, I think a lot of the childcare, debate in Minnesota, as I talk to providers, comes down to there are some state regulations that are impeding progress on childcare facilities in Minnesota. But one of the biggest things we did as a result of the pandemic was we expanded the child tax credit to $6,000
Mhm.
and allowed families to have that paid out, on a monthly basis if they chose to do it. And what you saw during that time period is child hunger came down. What you saw during that time period was young families feeling like they finally had a little bit of relief with that $500 a month of additional help. I mean, one of the biggest frustrations that I talk to young people about right now, and I have four sons myself, two of them are married, and I have three little grandsons. And, their biggest challenge is in expanding their family is how they can both keep working and afford the childcare. So
Mhm.
until we figure out, how to fix some of these frustrations when, the average first-time home buyer is nearly 40 years old in America, in Minnesota, that creates a situation where people really do feel like the American dream is out of reach for them. And as elected leaders, it's our job to try to figure out how we provide those paths to opportunity. It may not
Mhm.
be easy, for someone to go to trade school and earn that trade degree. It may not be easy to be able to, if someone chooses to go to college. And I'm on a terror right now. Like a 4-year degree should not be the only path to opportunity for people in this country. And the day it is, it's a real problem for a lot of young people.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned one of those elements that is so expensive for people is housing, obviously. And you previously mentioned like possibly zoning changes that are needed. It's clearly a big issue here in Minnesota, like a lot of other places. What are you in favor of to try and keep housing costs
Mm.
reasonable, particularly for those first-time buyers?
Yeah, it is a real challenge. And, I mean, when you talk to my mom about, growing up in a mobile home park, that was affordable housing to us. That's exactly what that represented. She always says to me, look, we could have had a 2-bedroom apartment or a 4-bedroom trailer. Like, that was affordable housing to us at the time. And I think in this country, we've got to figure out how we unleash the building of more housing, whether that's first time increasing the tax credits for first time home buyers, increasing the tax credits for builders to put up more homes. There's some interesting theories and concepts around modular housing that is
Yeah.
developing right now, which I think is incredibly interesting that we ought to be open to. But we need millions and millions of additional supply in this country. And until we also figure out the not in my backyard, the NIMBY issue in our communities. Look, everybody deserves affordable housing. As somebody who, grew up in a mobile home park, this is something that is incredibly personal to me.
So just a few more questions. I know you're got a lot on your plate. You were attacked in your apartment there a couple of years ago, and I was really impressed that your reaction was not so much punishment, but you said at the time that you wanted to work on the intersection of homelessness and drug addiction and mental health. And you've since, I think, sponsored something called the Reconnections Act. So I'm just wondering, what do you think's gotten in the way of us making more progress on that front? And if you could just explain a little bit about what the Reconnections Act is.
Yeah, let me start with this because sometimes people are afraid to ask me about it. And I appreciate you asking me about it because, anytime you are um, the survivor of a crime, and I do think of myself as the survivor of a crime. Look, the man who assaulted me in the elevator of the DC apartment that I lived in at the time. This man also was homeless, schizophrenic, and an addict. And as I went through sort of the process of coming to understand all of these issues, look, no one who is schizophrenic, who's unmedicated and doesn't have access to health care is going to be okay. And they are going to be a public safety concern for each of our communities. And so, someone who has serious mental health issues, we need to address those issues. Someone who um, is an addict, we have to address all of them, but we also have to understand the intersection of it all, right? So the Reconnections Act, it actually passed the House back in July. And it was included, in a Senate bill recently. So it was signed into law here this week by the president, which is kind of weird, like to have a bill signed by this president, the president that I've been fighting this whole time. But this simply attempts to put more resources into our community to deal with mental health and addiction issues. And look, we don't focus on this enough. I'm one of the
Mhm.
few, I think, elected leaders who has ever gone on TV and put up a political ad um, about the addiction crisis and the opioid epidemic, and specifically the scourge of fentanyl and press pills in our communities. And, the bill that the ad was about was me taking on big tech. Right now, if you can believe it, like these big tech companies, if they know that fentanyl press pills are being sold, distributed on their platforms, they have no responsibility to actually tell local law enforcement. Um, all of these issues just don't make sense to me. And that's been part of who I've been as a member of Congress and what I would be as a US Senator. Um, Devin Noring was a young man from Hastings. It's the stories that
Mhm.
families tell me about their loved ones. And when you start digging through the inequities of those stories, you understand that, you know, the law needs to be changed. Devin Noring died after he bought a press pill with fentanyl, almost 100% pure fentanyl, on Snapchat. There is something incredibly wrong that that social media platform is not held accountable and has no responsibility, right? Um, and so, as I do my job as a member of Congress, as I do my job as a US Senator, it will be to find the stories and the things that need to change. When I learned more about the young man who assaulted me, um, that gave me extra motivation to work on
Mhm.
all of these issues. It's not that wasn't a significant event in my life. I've been open that I saw a trauma counselor after for a period of time. Um, but doing the work in Congress, doing the work in the US Senate to maybe have, one young man um, who's schizophrenic, who has mental health and addiction issues, not fall
Mhm.
victim to the same um, I guess,
Right. Yeah.
society. I mean, that means a lot to me. And it's
Good.
something that I've sort of made a North Star here in my time serving my community.
Good. Good. So, final question for you, which is kind of top of mind for a lot of people here, is Trump is trying to wants to ban this temporary protected status for Somalis. I don't know if he can actually do it according to the law, but how I guess how do you take on a Trump and him trying to do something like this? Um, and then also at the same time work in a bipartisan fashion with other Congress people. I mean, that seems very challenging to me. So maybe that's a two-part question, but how, what's your take on the TPS? And then how do you plan to work in a bipartisan fashion while at the same time sort of counteracting some of Trump's worst inclinations?
Well, first of all, this is a great example of some of his worst inclinations. Removing TPS status for the Somali community in Minnesota will be deemed illegal. I fundamentally believe that. And beyond that, it's really beyond the pale to throw the Somali community kind of in one bucket in Minnesota. It's we have to stand up for our Somali neighbors. And what the Trump administration and Trump is doing is disgusting. It's inhumane. And so I stand with the Somali community in Minneapolis and throughout the state of Minnesota. I've gotten used to this, right? I mean, I kind of came out of nowhere 7 years ago. I'd never been involved in politics at all, except for the marriage equality fight in Minnesota as a private citizen. But I've kind of gotten used to over the last 7 years, having only entered politics at the time that Donald Trump was entering politics, of having one fist closed and fighting all of the policies that are going to hurt the people in the communities that I love in Minnesota, and having a hand extended, actually trying to solve the problems in the community that I love. It can't be one or the other. Like, right now, this is no time for Minnesota nice. I've got my fist closed a lot, fighting, $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts, or the SNAP cuts, or his attack on the Somali community, his attacks on the LGBTQ, particularly our trans neighbors. Look, you got to be able to do both of these things at the same time. And I've proven as a member of Congress that I'm willing and able and capable of doing it. In his first term, I was the first swing district Democrat to publicly call for his impeachment because he had committed impeachable offenses. So
Right.
Minnesota, Minneapolis needs to know about me is I'm always going to tell you the truth. I'm going to have that fist closed, ready to fight back um, uh, to the Trump administration. And at the same time, I'm going to be in the community working to try to solve actual problems that you face. That's who I am. That's who I'm going to continue to be as Minnesota's next U.S. Senator.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining me today. If listeners want to get more involved in your campaign, how do they do that? And do you have any upcoming stops here in Minneapolis they should know about?
Well, if you want to get involved, go to angiecraig.com. You can get a full list of the events that we have coming up, the volunteer opportunities, as well as where I am on a number of the additional issues. And I think this weekend we're going to be in St. Cloud a little bit, but we'll be back to Minneapolis very, very soon.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.